Sophia didn't know that the man she crashed into while fleeing through the pine woods at midnight was the most powerful alpha in North America. She didn't know that her scent would call to him like a song his wolf had been waiting centuries to hear. And she certainly didn't know that her whispered confession about being hunted would ignite something deadly protective in his chest, something that would make him willing to burn the world down before letting anyone harm her. All she knew was that her lungs burned, her bare feet were bleeding on the forest floor, and the sound of Marcus's hunting party was getting closer behind her. The branch caught her ankle and sent her sprawling forward into something solid and warm. Strong hands caught her before she could hit the ground, steadying her against a chest that felt like it was carved from granite. She looked up, gasping, into eyes that seemed to glow silver in the moonlight filtering through the canopy above. "Easy," he said, and his voice was like whiskey and smoke, low and calming in a way that made something in her chest unclench for the first time in 3 days. "You're safe." Safe. The word was foreign on her tongue, forgotten after so many months of running and hiding and looking over her shoulder. She tried to pull back, but his hands were still on her arms, warm and impossibly gentle, and her body seemed reluctant to break the contact. "I'm sorry," she stammered, finally finding her voice. "I didn't see you. I was running and—" The distant sound of men's voices calling her name made her blood freeze. They were closer than she'd thought. "I have to go." She tried to pull away again, but this time his grip tightened just slightly, not restraining her but steadying her as she swayed on her feet. From what? His eyes never left hers, and she felt something strange flutter in her stomach under that intense silver stare. "Please!" The word came out broken, desperate. "You don't understand. They're looking for me, and if they find me—" "They won't." The certainty in his voice made her breath catch. He spoke like someone accustomed to being obeyed, like his word was law that the universe itself bent to accommodate. "How many?" "What?" The question confused her, made her head spin. She was running on adrenaline and fear and 2 days without real sleep. "How many men are hunting you?" Each word was carefully measured, and something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. 5, maybe 6. She glanced over her shoulder toward the sound of approaching footsteps. "Marcus and his pack. They've been tracking me for days." The stranger's jaw tightened at the name, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw something inhuman flash across his features. "Marcus Blackwood?" Her heart stopped. "You know him?" "I know of him." The man's voice had gone cold, arctic in a way that made her shiver despite the warmth radiating from where his hands still touched her arms. "And I know he has no business hunting on my land." His land. The implication hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just some random hiker or even a local pack member. This was someone with authority, someone with power, someone who could speak about Marcus Blackwood like he was nothing more than a nuisance to be dealt with. "I should go," she whispered, trying again to step back. "I don't want to cause trouble." Too late for that. But his small smile took any sting out of the words. "What's your name?" "Sophia." The answer slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted the honesty. She'd been using false names for months, staying anonymous, staying invisible. Sophia. The way he said it made it sound like something precious, something worth protecting. "I'm Damon." He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. "When did you last eat?" The question was so unexpected it made her blink. What?" "Food, sleep, when?" His thumb traced across the back of her hand where he still held her. Such a simple touch, but it sent warmth shooting up her arm in a way that made her breath hitch. "Yesterday, I think, maybe the day before." Time had become fluid in her desperation to stay ahead of Marcus. Damon's expression darkened. "Come with me." "I can't." But even as she said it, her body swayed toward him, drawn by the warmth and the safety and the impossible sense of rightness she felt standing this close to him. "You don't understand. Marcus isn't someone you want to cross. He's nothing. The single word cut through her protest like a blade. He's nothing to me. The voices were getting closer now, close enough that she could make out individual words, could hear Marcus calling her name with that cruel, possessive edge that made her skin crawl. She looked up at Damon, this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she'd been too broken to voice, and made a choice that terrified her. "Okay." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Okay." His smile transformed his entire face, making him look less like a dangerous predator and more like a man relieved beyond measure. "This way." He led her deeper into the woods, away from the approaching voices, his hand warm and steady around hers. She should have been terrified. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted from her or why he was helping. But something in her chest had settled the moment he'd touched her, some wild, frightened thing finally going quiet for the first time in months. Behind them, Marcus's voice grew fainter, and for the first time since she'd escaped his compound 3 days ago, Sophia allowed herself to believe she might actually survive this. She had no idea that the man leading her to safety was about to turn her entire world upside down. The days that followed were a strange rhythm of safety she had forgotten existed. Sophia woke each morning in a cabin that felt like something from a fairy tale, all warm wood and soft blankets, and windows that looked out over a lake so blue it made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. Damon would already be awake, usually sitting by the fire with coffee and something that smelled like heaven cooking on the stove, and he would look up when she emerged from the bedroom with an expression so gentle it made her want to cry. She'd spent 3 months sleeping with one eye open, jumping at every sound, her body coiled tight with the constant expectation of violence. Now she found herself relaxing into routines she'd never thought she'd have again. Breakfast at the small wooden table by the window. Quiet conversations that revealed pieces of each other like puzzle fragments slowly clicking into place. Long walks around the lake where Damon seemed content to match her pace and listen to her rambling thoughts about everything and nothing. He was patient in a way that made her suspicious at first. Men like Marcus took what they wanted when they wanted it, and the idea of someone powerful enough to make Marcus Blackwood disappear, being content to simply exist in her presence, seemed impossible. But Damon never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything for the safety he'd provided. "You don't have to tell me," he said, on the 3rd morning, when she'd gone quiet in the middle of explaining how she'd ended up running through his woods. They were sitting on the cabin's front porch, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, and his voice was as gentle as the light washing over them. "Whatever happened, whatever brought you here, you don't owe me the story." But she found herself wanting to tell him anyway. There was something about the way he listened, completely focused on her words, that made her feel like what she had to say mattered, like she mattered. Marcus wasn't always terrible, she found herself saying, curling deeper into the oversized sweater Damon had given her. It smelled like him, warm and woodsy and impossibly comforting. When we first met, he was charming, protective. He made me feel special, chosen. She laughed, but there was no humour in it. I guess that should have been the first warning sign. Damon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't interrupt. It started small, comments about my friends, about how they didn't really understand me the way he did, suggestions about how I could improve myself, be better for him, and I wanted to be better. I wanted to be worthy of someone who'd chosen me. The words tasted bitter now. By the time I realised what was happening, I was completely isolated. No friends, no job, no way out. She risked a glance at Damon and found him watching her with an expression that made something warm unfurl in her chest. There was no judgment in his silver eyes, no pity, just quiet understanding and a kind of controlled fury that told her exactly what he thought of men who hurt the people they claimed to love. "How did you get away?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the steel underneath. His sister helped me. The memory still felt surreal. Elena, she'd been watching, seeing what he was doing, and she couldn't stand it anymore. She created a distraction during one of his pack meetings and gave me her car keys, told me to drive as far as I could and never look back. Smart woman. The smartest. I hope she's okay. Sophia pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. Marcus doesn't forgive betrayal. She'll be fine. The certainty in Damon's voice made her look at him sharply. I'll make sure of it. You can't just... She stopped, studying his face. There was something in his expression, a kind of absolute confidence that spoke to power she was only beginning to understand. Who are you? The question had been building for days. The cabin was too well appointed to belong to just anyone. Damon moved through the world like someone accustomed to being obeyed, spoke about Marcus like the man was an irritating pest rather than the terrifying predator Sophia knew him to be. And there was something else, something in the way other people looked at him on their trips into the nearby town, a mixture of respect and wariness that spoke to authority she couldn't quite grasp. Damon was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. What do you know about pack hierarchy? He asked finally. The basics, alpha, beta, the rest. She'd learned more than she'd ever wanted to during her time with Marcus. Why? There are alphas who control individual packs, and then there are those who control multiple packs, entire regions. He turned to look at her directly, and she could see something almost vulnerable in his expression. I'm the latter. The words took a moment to process, and when they did, Sophia felt her blood go cold. You're a regional alpha. The regional alpha for this entire territory. He paused, watching her reaction carefully. Some people call it the Alpha King. The coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the porch boards. Alpha King. She was sitting on a porch with the Alpha King, wearing his sweater, eating his food, talking about her pathetic problems like they mattered to someone who probably had armies at his disposal. I have to go. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move, the flight instinct that had kept her alive for months roaring back to life. I'm sorry, I never would have, if I'd known. Sophia. He stood too, but didn't move toward her, didn't try to stop her. Breathe. You don't understand. The panic was rising in her throat, threatening to choke her. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I can't be here, taking up your time, eating your food. People like me don't... People like you don't what? There was something sharp in his voice now, something that cut through her spiral and made her look at him. We don't matter to people like you. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Damon stared at her for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. The Bond doesn't care about pack hierarchy, Sophia. The words hit her like a physical blow. It doesn't care that you think you're nobody, or that I happen to have a title that scares people. It only cares that you're mine, and I'm yours, and everything else is just noise. Bond. The word hung in the air between them like a confession, like a promise, like a threat. She'd felt it from the moment he'd caught her in the woods, that strange pull in her chest, the way her body seemed to recognize his before her mind had caught up. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified her. That's impossible! But even as she said it, she could feel the truth of it thrumming through her veins like a second heartbeat. Is it? He took a step closer, and she didn't back away. Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me there isn't something in your chest that pulls tight every time you look at me. Tell me you sleep better in my bed than you have anywhere else in months. She couldn't tell him that, because it was true, all of it. The impossible rightness of being near him, the way her body had relaxed in his presence, the way she'd started to hope for things she'd thought were lost to her forever. I'm not mate material for an Alpha King. The words came out broken, desperate. I'm damaged goods, Damon. You're everything. He said it like a fact, like something carved in stone that couldn't be argued with. "You're brave and kind and stronger than you know, and you're mine. The title doesn't change that. The power doesn't change that. Nothing changes that." Tears were running down her face now, and she didn't know when she'd started crying. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I." His admission surprised her, made her look at him through her tears. "I've been waiting for you for so long, I'd started to think you were just a fantasy, and now you're here, and you're perfect, and you're terrified of me." "Not of you." The correction came automatically. "Never of you. I'm terrified of this." She gestured between them, at the impossible thing that had sparked to life in a moonlit forest. "I'm terrified of wanting something I can't have. You can have it." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "You can have all of it. Me, this, whatever you want. You just have to stay." Stay. The word hit her like a prayer answered, like a door opening to a room she thought was locked forever. She looked up at him, at this impossibly powerful man who was looking at her like she hung the moon, and felt something that had been broken for months slowly start to heal. "Okay." The word was barely a whisper. "I'll stay." When he kissed her, soft and careful and achingly gentle, Sophia finally understood what home was supposed to feel like. The weeks that followed were a strange rhythm of healing and growing terror. By day, Sophia allowed herself to sink into the impossible warmth of being cherished by someone like Damon. They would walk the property together, his hand warm and steady in hers, while he pointed out the borders of his territory and told her stories about the packs under his protection. She would cook dinner while he worked at the massive oak desk in the corner of the cabin, fielding phone calls from alphas across the region who sought his counsel on everything from territorial disputes to marriage alliances. But at night, when the world grew quiet and dark, the fear would creep back in like smoke under a door. She would lie awake listening to every sound, every creak of the cabin settling, every rustle of wind through the trees, waiting for the moment when Marcus would finally track her down. Because he would. Men like Marcus didn't simply let go of what they considered theirs. 3 days after their conversation on the porch, she noticed the first signs. A stranger at the general store in town asking questions about a dark-haired woman travelling alone. A car with out-of-state plates parked too long at the diner on the highway. Small things, easily dismissed, but Sophia had learned to read the warning signs of a hunt in progress. "You're thinking too loud," Damon murmured against her hair. They were sitting on the couch after dinner, her back against his chest while he worked through a stack of reports from his various pack leaders. The domestic normalcy of it should have been soothing, but anxiety clawed at her throat like a living thing. "Sorry." She tried to relax into his warmth, but her body remained coiled tight with tension. "Talk to me." He set the papers aside and wrapped his arms around her properly, and she couldn't help the way she melted into his embrace. "What's got you tied in knots?" "Nothing specific. Everything." She twisted in his arms so she could see his face. "There was a man in town today asking Sarah at the store if she'd seen anyone matching my description, and yesterday I saw the same blue sedan twice on different roads." Damon's expression went carefully neutral, which told her everything she needed to know. He'd noticed too. "It could be nothing," she continued, even though she didn't believe it. "Random coincidence, but Marcus has resources, connections. If he's really looking for me—" "He is." The words were quiet but certain. "My people have been tracking increased activity from his pack for the last week. Phone calls to contacts in this region, requests for information about recent newcomers." The confirmation hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting it. "He's getting closer." "He's trying to." Damon's arms tightened around her. "That doesn't mean he'll succeed." But Sophia could see the future unfolding before her with crystal clarity. Marcus would keep searching, keep following every lead, and eventually those leads would point him directly to this cabin, to Damon, to the best thing that had ever happened to her, She pulled away from him and walked to the window, staring out at the tree line that looked black and endless under the starlit sky. "He'll find me eventually," she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. "You know he will. And when he does—" "He won't." Damon's voice cut through her fears like a blade, deadly quiet and absolutely certain. She turned to look at him, and her breath caught at the expression on his face. Gone was the gentle, patient man who'd been courting her with such careful tenderness. This was the Alpha King, and there was something lethal in his silver eyes that made her understand exactly why other alphas sought his counsel and feared his displeasure. Let him try. Each word was measured, precise, carrying the weight of absolute promise. Let him come here. Let him step 1 foot onto my territory, looking for what belongs to me. Damon, do you know what happened to the last alpha who threatened something I cared about? He stood slowly, moving with the predatory grace that marked him as something far more dangerous than human. His name was Richard Kellaway. He controlled 3 packs in the Eastern Territories and thought his numbers made him untouchable. Sophia had heard whispers about the Kellaway incident, even sheltered as she'd been in Marcus's compound. An entire pack hierarchy had simply vanished overnight, their territory absorbed by neighbouring alphas who swore they'd never seen anything like the thoroughness of their destruction. He made the mistake of targeting someone under my protection. Damon continued, and his voice held the kind of cold fury that could freeze blood in veins. I made an example of him that every alpha in North America still talks about in whispers. You can't start a war over me. The words came out broken, desperate. I'm not worth that kind of violence. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. When Damon finally spoke, his voice was soft enough to be gentle, but there was steel underneath that made her shiver. "You're my mate. You're everything. There isn't a war I wouldn't start for you, isn't a line I wouldn't cross." He moved closer, and she found herself trapped between his body and the window, surrounded by the heat and scent and impossible safety of him. "Marcus can bring his entire pack, can call in every favour he's owed, can rally every alpha who thinks they have a grudge against me. It won't matter. He has 40 wolves in his pack, trained fighters, and connections to the council. I have 300. The number hit her like a physical blow. She'd known Damon was powerful, had understood that the title of Alpha King meant something significant, but the reality of his resources was staggering. And the council answers to me when it comes to territorial disputes. She stared at him, this man who'd been so patient and gentle with her, and tried to reconcile him with the kind of power that could field an army. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to be afraid of me." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing across her cheekbone with heartbreaking tenderness. "I wanted you to know me first. The man who makes you coffee in the morning and listens to your stories and thinks you're the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. Not the title, not the power, just me." Tears were burning behind her eyes, and she leaned into his touch despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what loving you means." "What does it mean?" "It means Marcus will come here with everything he has. It means people will die because of me, because I was too selfish to keep running." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "It means I have to choose between your safety and my own happiness, and I can't make that choice." "Then don't." He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel his breath against her lips. "Stay with me. Let me protect you. Let me handle Marcus and his pack and anyone else who thinks they can take what's mine." "And if you lose?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Damon stared down at her for a long moment, and when he smiled, it was the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. "I won't." The certainty in his voice was absolute, unshakable. "I've been waiting 34 years for you, Sophia. I'm not losing you now to some 2-bit alpha who thinks intimidation makes him powerful." Before she could respond, His phone rang. The sound cut through the tension like a blade, sharp and urgent in the quiet cabin. Damon glanced at the screen and his expression went grim. "It's Elena." He answered on the second ring, putting it on speaker. "Tell me." "Marcus knows." Elena's voice was tight with fear, words coming fast and breathless. "He found the GPS tracker I hid in Sophia's bag before she left. He's been tracking the general area for weeks, but tonight he pinpointed the exact location." Sophia's knees went weak, and only Damon's steadying hand kept her upright. "How long do we have?" "He left an hour ago with his best fighters, maybe 2 hours before they reached the territorial border, another 30 minutes to your location." "How many?" 15, including Marcus." Eleanor paused, and when she spoke again her voice was barely a whisper. "Damon, he's not planning to take her back alive. He'd rather see her dead than with another alpha." The phone slipped from Damon's hand, clattering to the floor as he pulled Sophia against his chest. She could feel the change in him immediately, the way his body went rigid with barely contained fury, could hear the low growl building in his throat that spoke to the wolf beneath his skin. "Pack a bag," he said against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Take only what you need." "Where are we going?" "Nowhere." He pulled back to look at her, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes, along with something else. Something that looked like anticipation. "You're going to the safe house with my beta and a security detail. I'm going to end this." "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended, born of pure terror at the thought of him facing Marcus alone. "I won't let you fight my battles for me." "This isn't your battle anymore." His hands framed her face, holding her gaze steady. "The moment he stepped onto my territory with the intent to harm my mate, it became mine." Outside, she could hear vehicles approaching in the distance, could see the first flash of headlights through the trees. Marcus had found her, just as she'd always known he would. But as she looked up at Damon, at the absolute fury and deadly promise in his silver eyes, she realized something had changed. She wasn't running anymore. "He'll find me eventually," she had whispered weeks ago, broken and certain of her fate. "Let him try," Damon had answered, and now she finally understood what those words meant. They meant war. The confrontation came faster than expected. Sophia had barely finished shoving clothes into a bag when the sound of vehicles roared into the clearing around the cabin. Car doors slammed like gunshots in the night air, and she could hear Marcus's voice cutting through the darkness, sharp with the kind of authority that had once made her cower. "I know you're in there, Sophia," he called out, his words carrying the familiar edge of controlled violence. "Come out now and we can handle this civilly." Damon moved to the window, his body coiled with lethal tension as he surveyed the scene outside. 15 wolves in human form had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle around the cabin, and Marcus stood at their centre like a general commanding his troops. Even from a distance, Sophia could see the cruel smile that had haunted her nightmares for months. "Civilly," Damon repeated, his voice soft with dark amusement. "Is that what he calls dragging you back to a life that nearly destroyed you?" He won't take no for an answer. Sophia's hands were shaking as she zipped the bag closed. "Marcus doesn't understand the concept of losing." "Then it's time he learned." Damon moved away from the window with the fluid grace of a predator, and when he turned to face her, she saw that something fundamental had shifted in his expression. The gentle, patient man who'd been courting her with such careful tenderness was gone, replaced by something ancient and deadly that made the air itself feel charged with danger. "Stay inside," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "No matter what you hear, no matter what happens out there, you stay inside until I come for you. Damon, please, promise me." He crossed the room in 2 strides and gripped her shoulders, his silver eyes blazing with intensity. "Promise me you'll stay inside." "I promise." The words came out as barely a whisper. He kissed her then, hard and desperate and full of things he didn't have time to say. When he pulled away, she could see her own fear reflected in his eyes, along with something else, something that looked like absolute certainty. "I love you," he said against her lips. "Whatever happens out there, remember that." Before she could respond, he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a death knell in the suddenly quiet cabin. Sophia pressed herself against the wall beside the window, angling her body so she could see the confrontation unfolding outside without being spotted. Damon walked down the porch steps with the casual confidence of a man taking an evening stroll. His hands relaxed at his sides, his posture deceptively calm. Marcus's wolves shifted restlessly as he approached, something in their body language speaking to an instinctive recognition of a more dominant predator. But Marcus himself seemed oblivious to the danger, his attention focused entirely on the cabin behind Damon. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded without preamble. "Safe." Damon stopped just outside the circle of armed men, and Sophia noticed that none of them had moved to surround him. They were all still focused outward, toward the cabin, as if they couldn't quite bring themselves to turn their backs on the darkness beyond the tree line. "That's not what I asked!" Marcus's voice carried the kind of cold authority that had once made Sophia's blood freeze. "I want my property returned to me, now!" The word property hung in the air like a slap, and Sophia watched Damon's shoulders go rigid with barely controlled fury. When he spoke, his voice was soft enough to be conversational, but it carried across the clearing with perfect clarity. "Your property." The words were a statement, not a question. "Is that what you think she is?" "I know what she is." Marcus smiled, and it was the expression that had taught Sophia to fear happiness, because it always came at someone else's expense. "She's a runaway who belongs to me, and you're the fool who thought he could steal her." "I didn't steal anything." Damon took another step forward, and this time several of Marcus's wolves actually stepped back. "She came to me, bleeding, terrified, running for her life from the monster who claimed to love her. She ran because she's dramatic, because she overreacted to a little discipline." Marcus's casual dismissal of her terror made Sophia's hands clench into fists. "But she's learned her lesson now, haven't you, sweetheart?" His voice carried toward the cabin, sickeningly sweet with false affection, and Sophia had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Even now, even surrounded by Damon's protection, Marcus could still make her feel small and worthless and afraid. "She's not answering," Damon observed mildly. "I wonder why that might be." "Because she knows better than to defy me twice." Marcus's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Now step aside. This is pack business, and you have no authority here." The laughter that escaped Damon was low and dark and completely without humour. Pack business, authority. He shook his head slowly. "You really have no idea who you're talking to, do you?" "I know you're some regional alpha who thinks his territory makes him untouchable, but Sophia belongs to me, and I'm taking her home." "No." The single word cut through the night air like a blade. "You're not." Something in Damon's tone must have finally penetrated Marcus's arrogance, because his expression shifted from condescending amusement to wary calculation. "I don't think you understand the situation here. I have 15 trained fighters. You're alone." "Am I?" The question was barely out of Damon's mouth when the tree line erupted with movement. Wolves emerged from the shadows like ghosts materializing from the darkness, dozens of them, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. They formed a perfect circle around Marcus and his men, close enough that their eyes glowed like stars in the moonlight. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She'd known Damon was powerful, had understood intellectually that he commanded multiple packs, but seeing his wolves appear like magic from the forest was something else entirely. There had to be 50 of them at least, all perfectly still, all waiting for their alpha's command. Marcus's face had gone white, his earlier confidence evaporating as he finally began to understand exactly who he was facing. "Alpha King," he whispered, and the title carried the weight of recognition and dawning terror. Now you're starting to understand." Damon's voice carried across the clearing with perfect clarity. "You came onto my territory. You threatened my mate. You called her your property." Each statement was delivered with deadly calm. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" "She's mine," Marcus repeated, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "I claimed her first. You abused her." The words came out like a growl, and Sophia could see the change beginning in Damon, could see his human facade starting to slip. "You isolated her, terrified her, made her believe she was worthless. That's not claiming, that's torturing." "I was training her to be a proper mate." "You were destroying her." Damon's voice rose for the first time, carrying across the clearing with the kind of fury that made the earth itself seem to tremble. "And now you have the audacity to come here to my home and demand that I hand over the woman I love so you can finish the job." "Love?" Marcus laughed, but there was hysteria creeping into the sound. "She's nothing. She's a damaged little mouse who can't even stand up for herself. What could someone like you possibly want with—" He never finished the sentence. Damon moved faster than should have been possible, crossing the distance between them in a blur of motion that ended with his hand around Marcus's throat. The other man's feet left the ground, and suddenly the clearing was filled with the sound of growling as both packs shifted into defensive positions. "Say another word about her," Damon said conversationally, as if he wasn't currently holding a grown man off the ground with one hand. "Please, give me an excuse." Marcus's wolves had raised their weapons, but they were vastly outnumbered and they knew it. Damon's pack had them surrounded completely, yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness, waiting for the signal to attack. "You're making a mistake," Marcus gasped, clawing at the hand around his throat. "The Council won't stand for this kind of territorial aggression." "The Council works for me." Damon's smile was a terrible thing to see. And even if they didn't, do you really think they'd side with an alpha who can't control his own territory against the king who's kept peace in North America for the last decade? He released Marcus suddenly, letting him drop to the ground in a gasping heap. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your wolves and leave my territory. You're going to return to whatever hole you crawled out of, and you're going to forget Sophia ever existed." "And if I refuse?" Marcus had regained his feet, but his voice was shaky and his earlier bravado had completely disappeared. "Then I'll demonstrate exactly what I do to alphas who threaten my mate." Damon's voice went soft again, deadly quiet. "Ask Richard Kellaway how that worked out for him. Oh wait, you can't, because there wasn't enough left of him to ask." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the night sounds of the forest seemed to have stopped, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus looked around the clearing, taking in the dozens of glowing eyes watching him from the darkness, the rigid postures of his own men who were clearly reconsidering their life choices. When his gaze finally returned to Damon, Sophia could see the exact moment he realized he'd lost. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Yes," Damon replied calmly, "it is." Marcus's retreat was swift and graceless, his wolves scrambling for their vehicles with the desperate haste of men who just realized how close they'd come to dying. Within minutes the clearing was empty except for the fading sound of engines disappearing into the night. Damon stood perfectly still until the last sound faded away, and then he turned toward the cabin. Even from a distance, Sophia could see the exhaustion in his shoulders, the way the confrontation had drained something vital from him. She was off the porch and running toward him before she'd consciously decided to move, throwing herself into his arms with enough force to stagger them both. He caught her against his chest, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she could feel the tremor in his hands that spoke to how much the encounter had cost him. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "He's gone. He won't be back." "You could have been killed." The words came out muffled against his shirt, and she could taste salt on her lips from tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "Never." His voice was absolutely certain. I told you, I've been waiting too long for you to lose you now." When she pulled back to look at him, she saw her own relief reflected in his silver eyes, along with something else. Something that looked like wonder, like a man who still couldn't quite believe he'd won the most important battle of his life. "I love you too," she whispered, finally able to say the words she'd been too afraid to voice before. "I love you so much it terrifies me." When he kissed her this time, it was different from all the careful, gentle kisses that had come before. This was claiming and promise and celebration all wrapped into one, and when they finally broke apart, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Behind them, his wolves melted back into the forest as silently as they'd appeared, leaving them alone in the clearing under a canopy of stars. Tomorrow there would be conversations about security and territory and what Marcus's retreat meant for the future. Tonight, there was just the two of them and the impossible miracle of being together and alive and safe. "So," she said against his lips, unable to keep the smile out of her voice, "is this the part where you carry me over the threshold?" His answering laugh was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of healing she hadn't known was possible. Sophia woke each morning in Damon's arms, sunlight streaming through windows that no longer made her anxious, in a bed that had become synonymous with safety rather than vulnerability. The nightmares that had plagued her for months began to fade, replaced by dreams of golden eyes and gentle hands and a future that stretched out before her like an unopened gift. Marcus's retreat had been absolute. Word came 3 days after the confrontation that he'd dissolved his pack entirely, scattering his wolves to other territories rather than face the consequences of challenging the Alpha King. Some had sought sanctuary with Damon's allied packs, others had simply disappeared into the vast network of lone wolves that existed on the edges of organised territory. Marcus himself had vanished completely, and while Damon's scouts continued to monitor for any sign of his return, even they seemed confident that the threat was truly over. "He won't come back," Damon said one morning over coffee, reading through the latest reports from his security team. "Men like Marcus are bullies at heart. They only target victims they think are helpless. Now that he knows you're under my protection, you've lost all your appeal as prey." Sophia curled deeper into the oversized sweater she'd claimed from his closet, savouring the way it smelled like him even after multiple washings. "It's strange," she admitted. "I spent so many months looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, and now I can't even remember what that constant fear felt like." "That's healing." He reached across the table to take her hand, thumb tracing across her knuckles in the absent way that had become second nature to both of them. "That's what happens when your nervous system finally believes it's safe." The integration into his world had been surprisingly seamless. Damon's inner circle had welcomed her with a warmth that still caught her off guard, treating her not as an outsider who'd stumbled into their alpha's life, but as someone who'd always belonged there. His beta, James, had become something like an older brother, protective and teasing in equal measure. The pack's healer, an elderly woman named Margaret who possessed more wisdom in her pinky finger than most people managed in a lifetime, had taken Sophia under her wing with the kind of maternal affection she'd never experienced from her own family. "You're good for him," Margaret had said one afternoon while they worked together in the extensive gardens behind the main pack house. Sophia had been learning about the medicinal properties of various plants, ostensibly to help with minor injuries and illnesses, but really because she discovered a deep satisfaction in nurturing things back to health. "I haven't seen him this settled in decades." "Settled?" Sophia looked up from the lavender she'd been carefully transplanting, dirt under her nails and sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool autumn air. At peace with himself. Damon's always carried the weight of leadership like a burden, felt responsible for every soul under his protection. But since you arrived, there's a lightness to him that wasn't there before. Margaret's knowing smile made heat rise in Sophia's cheeks. Love does that to people, makes them remember there's more to life than duty and obligation. The observation had stayed with her for days, made her more aware of the small changes she could see in Damon when he came home from dealing with pack business. The way his shoulders would relax the moment he saw her, the smile that seemed to come easier now, reaching his eyes in a way that suggested genuine happiness rather than mere politeness. The way he would pull her into his arms and breathe deeply, as if her scent alone could wash away whatever stresses the day had brought. "I have a proposition for you," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, her head in his lap while he worked through a stack of correspondence from various pack leaders. His fingers were carding through her hair in the absent way that never failed to make her drowsy and content. "Oh?" She tilted her head to look up at him, noting the slight uncertainty in his expression. "Should I be worried?" "That depends on how you feel about public speaking and formal ceremonies." His smile was rueful. "The annual council meeting is next month. Representatives from every major pack in North America will be there, along with the continental alphas from Europe and Asia." Sophia's stomach did a nervous flip. "And you want me to come with you?" "I want to present you as my mate officially, make it clear to everyone that you're not just someone I'm seeing casually, but my chosen partner and future Lunar Queen." He paused, studying her face carefully. "But only if that's something you want. There's no pressure, no timeline. We can wait years if you need to." The offer was so perfectly, quintessentially Damon that she almost laughed. Even now, even after everything they'd been through together, he was still giving her choices, still making sure she felt in control of her own destiny. What would that mean exactly, being presented as your mate? "It means you'd stand beside me during the formal ceremonies, meet with the other Lunar Queens, participate in the alliance discussions that affect our territory. It means everyone would know that you speak for me when I'm not available, that disrespecting you is the same as disrespecting me directly." The scope of what he was offering hit her like a wave. Not just love, not just partnership, but true equality in the world he commanded. The chance to matter, to contribute, to be something more than just the woman the Alpha King happened to care about. "You'd trust me with that kind of authority?" "Sophia." He set his papers aside completely, giving her his full attention. "I'd trust you with my life, with my pack's lives, with everything I've spent 34 years building." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with heartbreaking tenderness. "You're not just the woman I love. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Someone who survived hell and came out the other side with her kindness intact. Of course I trust you." Tears pricked at her eyes, the casual way he spoke about her strength, still something she was learning to accept. For so long, Marcus had convinced her that survival meant weakness, that needing help made her pathetic. But Damon saw her scars as proof of resilience, her gentleness as evidence of courage rather than frailty. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I want that. I want to stand beside you." The kiss he gave her was soft and sweet and full of promises about their future together. When they broke apart, she could see relief in his silver eyes, as if some part of him had been afraid she'd choose to remain in the shadows rather than step into the light with him. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's traditional for mates to exchange marking gifts before formal presentations. Something that shows the bond to other wolves, makes it clear that you're claimed and protected." The ring he pulled out was unlike anything she'd ever seen. The central stone was a perfect oval of amber that seemed to glow with internal fire, surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the firelight and threw it back in brilliant sparks. But it was the engraving on the platinum band that made her breath catch, an intricate pattern of wolves running through a forest, so detailed she could make out individual leaves on the trees. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It belonged to my grandmother. She was the last Lunar Queen before my mother, and according to family legend, she only wore it when she was certain she'd found her true mate." He took her left hand, thumb tracing across her ring finger. "The amber is from the sacred grove where my pack was founded 300 years ago, The diamonds represent the major pack territories under our protection." "Damon?" She was crying again, overwhelmed by the significance of what he was offering her. This wasn't just jewelry, wasn't just a symbol of their relationship. It was history, legacy, a place in something bigger and more important than she'd ever imagined being part of. "Marry me," he said simply, "not because you need my protection, not because you're afraid to be alone, but because you want to build a life with me, because you love me enough to take on everything that comes with being my partner." The yes was on her lips before he'd finished speaking, but she found herself launching into his arms instead, knocking them both sideways on the couch in a tangle of limbs and laughter. When she finally managed to surface from the chaos of celebratory kisses, the ring was on her finger and the fire had burned down to glowing embers. "So that's a yes?" he asked, grinning up at her from where she'd ended up sprawled across his chest. "That's a yes," she confirmed, holding up her hand to admire the way the amber caught the light. "Though I have to warn you, I have no idea how to be a Lunar Queen." "Lucky for you, I have no idea how to be married." His smile was soft and full of wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe she'd said yes. "I guess we'll figure it out together." "Together," she agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first of the season dusting the windows with white. But inside, wrapped in Damon's arms with his grandmother's ring on her finger and their future stretching out before them like an unwritten story, Sophia had never felt warmer in her life. The scared, broken woman who'd stumbled through his woods all those weeks ago felt like someone from another lifetime. In her place was someone stronger, someone braver, someone worthy of the love she'd been offered, someone who was finally, completely, irrevocably home. 2 months later, Sophia stood in front of a floor-length mirror in what had once seemed like an impossible dream. The formal mating ceremony dress was everything she'd never dared to imagine for herself. Ivory silk that flowed like water, delicate beadwork that caught the light with every breath, and a neckline that showed off the amber pendant Damon had given her just that morning. It was his mother's, he'd explained with characteristic gentleness, a final piece of family history to welcome her into the bloodline that stretched back centuries. "You look like a queen," Margaret said from behind her, making final adjustments to the flowing train. The elderly healer's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and her voice carried the kind of maternal pride that made Sophia's chest tight with emotion she was still learning to accept. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, born of the same disbelief that had been following her for weeks. Even now, even after everything they'd been through together, some small part of her couldn't quite accept that this was real. "Good thing it's your life, then." Margaret's reflection smiled at her from the mirror. "You've earned every moment of happiness coming your way, child. Don't let old fears convince you otherwise." The ceremony itself was to take place in the sacred grove where Damon's pack had been founded, under ancient oaks that had witnessed countless mating bonds over the centuries. Representatives from every major pack in North America had travelled to attend, along with several continental alphas who'd made the journey specifically to witness the alpha king's claiming of his mate. It was, according to James, the most significant pack gathering in over 50 years. "Are you ready?" Damon's voice came from the doorway, and Sophia turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. He was devastating in his formal ceremonial attire, charcoal grey that brought out his silver eyes, ancient pack symbols embroidered in gold thread across his chest, and an air of absolute authority that somehow made him look both regal and entirely hers. "I've been ready for weeks," she said, and realised as the words left her mouth that they were completely true. The nervous energy that had been building all morning had settled into something deeper, something that felt like certainty rather than anxiety. The walk to the grove felt like stepping into a fairy tale. The path was lined with pack members holding torches that cast dancing shadows through the trees, and the air was sweet with the scent of late summer flowers. Sophia could hear the low murmur of conversation from the assembled guests, the rustle of formal attire, the kind of anticipatory energy that preceded significant moments. When they reached the ceremonial clearing, she understood why this place had been chosen for such occasions. The ancient oaks formed a natural cathedral, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that filtered the afternoon sunlight into soft golden beams. At the centre of the clearing stood the pack's eldest elder, a man whose authority was so absolute that even other alphas showed him deference. The ceremony itself was both simpler and more profound than she'd expected. There were no lengthy speeches or elaborate rituals, just the ancient words that had bound mates together for generations, and the exchange of vows that felt like promises carved into her soul. "Do you, Damon Alexander Gray, Alpha King of the North American Territories, take this woman as your chosen mate, your equal partner, your Lunar Queen?" The elder's voice carried across the clearing with perfect clarity. "I do." Damon's answer was immediate and certain, his silver eyes never leaving hers. "In this life and every life that follows." "Do you, Sophia Marie Chen, accept this bond freely given? Do you take this man as your chosen mate, your alpha, your king?" "I do." The words came out strong and clear, carrying none of the hesitation that might have plagued her months ago. Always and completely. The marking that followed was intimate, despite the crowd of witnesses, Damon's teeth finding the sensitive junction of her neck and shoulder, while she pressed her own mark just above his heart. The bond that had been growing between them since that first night in the woods snapped into place with an intensity that made her knees weak, and suddenly she could feel everything he felt. His overwhelming love, his fierce protectiveness, his deep satisfaction at finally being able to call her his in front of the entire supernatural world. The celebration that followed seemed to stretch on forever. A blur of congratulations and formal introductions and political conversations that she was slowly learning to navigate. But through it all, Damon never left her side, his hand warm and steady at her back, his presence a constant reminder that she belonged here as much as anyone. "So this is the woman who managed to tame the Alpha King," said Elena Rosewood, the Luna of the Pacific Coast Pack, during a brief quiet moment between toasts. Her tone was warm and curious rather than judgmental, and Sophia found herself relaxing in the other woman's presence. "I don't think I tamed anything," Sophia replied, glancing across the clearing to where Damon was deep in conversation with several continental alphas. Even now, surrounded by other powerful men, he commanded the space with effortless authority. "I just gave him someone to be gentle with." "That's the secret, isn't it?" Elena's smile was knowing. The strongest men need someone who makes them want to be soft. As the evening wore on and the formal festivities gave way to more casual celebration, Sophia found herself standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her new pack family laugh and dance and celebrate the bond that had brought them all together. 6 months ago, she'd been a terrified woman running through dark woods, convinced she was worth nothing to anyone. Tonight, she was a Lunar Queen, surrounded by people who'd claimed her as family, wearing the marks of a man who'd moved heaven and earth to keep her safe. Any regrets? Damon appeared beside her, having escaped his political obligations long enough to check on his new wife. His formal jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a contentment in his expression that made him look younger than she'd ever seen him. "Only that it took us so long to get here," she said, leaning into his warmth. "Though I suppose we both needed time to become the people who could make this work." "Speak for yourself. I was ready the moment I caught you in those woods." His arm tightened around her waist, and she could feel the satisfaction in his voice. "I knew you were mine before you even told me your name." And if I'd been too broken to heal, too scared to trust, then I would have waited. His answer was immediate and certain. However long it took, I would have waited. The simple certainty in his voice made her turn to look at him properly, studying the face that had become more familiar to her than her own. "You really mean that?" "I mean everything I've ever said to you." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing across her cheekbones with the same reverence he'd shown her from the very beginning. "You're everything, Sophia. You always have been." When he kissed her, she could taste promise and forever on his lips, could feel the absolute certainty of his love in the way his hands trembled slightly as they framed her face. Around them, the celebration continued, but for a moment it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth, still amazed that she could say the words without fear, without reservation, without the crushing anxiety that had once made her believe she didn't deserve happiness. "I love you too," he murmured back. "My Luna, my queen, my everything." Later, as they made their way back to the house that had become home, Sophia caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was radiant with happiness, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that came from finally understanding her own worth. She was wearing a crown of flowers from the ceremony, Damon's claiming mark fresh on her throat, and an expression of complete and utter belonging. She thought of that terrified woman who'd stumbled through dark woods months ago, desperate and broken, and convinced she'd never be safe again. That woman had whispered, "He'll find me eventually," certain that her past would always define her future. She thought of Damon's response, deadly quiet and absolutely certain. Let him try. Now she understood that those words hadn't just been about Marcus, hadn't just been about the immediate threat that had brought them together. They'd been about every fear, every doubt, every voice that tried to convince her she wasn't worthy of love. Damon had been declaring war on every force that might try to hurt her, including the ones that lived inside her own mind. "Where are you listening from?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping out with surprising naturalness as she turned away from the mirror to find Damon watching her with gentle curiosity. "Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts." He smiled, understanding immediately that she was practicing the kind of community engagement that would be part of her new role as Luna Queen. "If you'd like to support me," he added with mock seriousness, "please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people hear these stories." They dissolved into laughter at the absurdity of it, but underneath the humour was something deeper. The recognition that their story had become something worth telling, something that might offer hope to other people who'd forgotten they deserved love. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Sophia realised that for the first time in her life she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She wasn't looking over her shoulder, wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, wasn't convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. She was home, claimed and cherished and completely safe, with a man who'd proven that fairy tales could be real if you were brave enough to believe in them. And she'd never have to run again.